Great. Okay, so on behalf of Hispanics in Philanthropy, Excelencia in Education, and the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado, I'm really excited to welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Ann Hand. I am Hispanics in Philanthropy's Program Manager for our Hip to College initiative, and this webinar is about that program. And what we're trying to do is to go through the process that we went through as we worked towards implementing an education-based focused initiative at a national level. So my co-presenters today are Debra Santiago. Deborah is the Chief Operating Officer and Vice President for Policy at Excelencia in Education. And Carlos Martinez, who's the Executive Director of the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado. And, I'd like to thank them both in particular for all the time that they've put into working with us on this initiative, and also specifically in their preparation for this webinar. Thank you both very much. So just a little bit of background information about Hispanics in Philanthropy. We are a nonprofit that was founded in 1983, and our mission is to strengthen Latino communities in a variety of different ways through the philanthropic sector. So the first one is increasing resources for Latinos in civil society. The next is increasing Latino participation and leadership throughout the field of philanthropy. And finally, longer term, we look to foster policy change to enhance equity and inclusiveness for Latinos in particular. We do this through a variety of ways, but programmatically, our most successful model has been the Funders Collaborative for Strong Latino Communities, which has been implemented in 19 different sites transnationally throughout the Americas, and we've received awards because it's a very creative way and very responsive way and very participative way to do grant making with Latino-led, Latino-serving nonprofits. I'm not going to belabor the model. These slides will be available after the presentation, and we're available to answer questions more specifically later. But basically, what we wanted to do was try to take the success of the Funders Collaborative model and translate it to specific focused initiatives. The goal behind doing that was to be more deliberate and more targeted and more effective within specific issue areas. So the Funders Collaborative in general works to build capacity among Latino-led, Latino-serving grassroots nonprofits. And the focused initiative model is very similar, the main difference being that we're looking at, in addition to increasing capacity, increasing advocacy capacity, and also increasing awareness of issues pertinent to the Latino community. So, there's a variety of different specific topics that you can address with this type of model, and the specific topic area that we're looking to address with the Hip to College program is education. So what is Hip to College? Just a very broad overview. It's one of our focused initiatives in education. We received support for this initiative from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and basically, in a nutshell, it's taking the strengths from our Funders Collaborative model and applying it specifically to the pipeline for post-secondary success and other types of, basically strengthening different elements of the education system that will allow Latino youth to be successful academically and economically throughout the course of their lives. So since specifically related to education, there's different ways that we could have addressed the issue, or not the issue, but the program internally. Something that we felt was very important for this project was to really have an external expert view on the policy landscape for education for Latinos, and to understand the pros and cons of alignment in different aspects of the different areas where we were talking about where we might want to work. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Debra Santiago now, and she will be giving an overview of that needs assessment and diagnostic report, which is available on our website, and I am happy to distribute the link to anybody who might be interested. So. There you go. Deborah, can you?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I can hear you. Thank you. Yes. I'm looking to see if I can change the slide as well, though. Anne, can you change the slide?
Oh, yeah, sure.
There we go. I don't know if I have control now. Hello, everyone. This is Debra Santiago from Excelencia in Education. I'd also want to thank you all for taking a little bit of your time from today to talk with us. Hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So we partnered with Hispanics in Philanthropy to really think critically about what HIP could be doing and where they could work and with who they should work in addressing Latinos' pathway and success to college and through college to completion. And at Excelencia in Education, we're 10 years old and young, I should say, and we've been focused on accelerating Latino student success in higher education from our inception. And for us, partnering with Hispanics in Philanthropy and their work is a real natural exchange and interaction, not only because we have similar missions and core values, but because the attention we were giving to Latino students in the educational pipeline was completely in sync. Our focus and effort in addressing communities, partners, strategies to move really is working, what others can be doing, and then collaborating with those who are really committed to taking action, not just talking about or analyzing it, but doing something about it in order to ensure we're increasing Latino student success. In our conversations with Hispanics in Philanthropy, they totally understood that and had boots on the ground and relationships to be able to strengthen it. And so we took some effort to create a need assessment to help them think through from a potential of 5 locations where they might be able to work. And I'm sorry, I don't have control. There we go. I have control now. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about where and with whom we choose to work at Excelencia, because I do think it's very relevant and underpinning the approach that Hispanics in Philanthropy took in figuring out where they might also want to work. And maybe for many of you this seems a little bit pedantic, but I do think, while it's more complex, it gets to the heart of what really matters. And when we work with different individuals, communities, and others, obviously you first start with, what are you interested in Latino student success? It sounds a little trite, but you'd be surprised how that explicit focus on a subgroup isn't explicit. It's not intentional. And for us, making sure that those we're working with, whether it's organizations or communities or individuals, are really interested in Latino student success as part of the whole, but certainly being intentional in Latino focus. The second is they have to be ready to work. And I say that, again, I'm not trying to be too trite, but you can spend a lot of time trying to convince institutions, organizations that serving Latinos and working with Latino community is important. And you can spend a lot of time doing that and then less time actually doing the work. So when Sarita Brown and I started Excelencia, we said, look, there are a lot of people ready to take action. We have to find ways to work with them. And we can certainly try to compel, but if they're not ready to work, if they're still trying to understand, we'll collaborate with them in small ways, but if you're ready to work and know what's going to be involved, then we really want to make sure that we're engaged with you. So that's the second part. Not insignificant. We have a lot of conversations about data, and I love data, but data is only as good as it's used, and that's where we ultimately focus our efforts. Third, we want to work with organizations and institutions and communities that understand the current context, opportunities, and partners. And one of the reasons in working with HIP this was important for us is because we collaborated in providing a need assessment so that they had the most up-to-date, most current context, opportunities, and potential partners as they really thought long and hard about what they could do in communities across the country. And they had constrained resources, but lots of opportunity. And so knowing that context really helped them make pragmatic decisions of where they could go and partner to really serve a community in meaningful ways. And that's the undercurrent of this need assessment and the publication that Anna's been referring to. And there's a lot that unpacks there. I'm going to share with you a little bit of what we did in that need analysis, but I hope this resonates with those of you on the call who are really thinking about where to spend your time, effort, energy, and partnering. The fourth is not insignificant, and that's committed to long-term effort. We do have conversations with organizations and institutions that are interested in a short-term, quick turnaround, a sexy idea of success and what that might mean in serving Latinos. And I'm not opposed to short-term success and what's sexy. I say that in quotation marks. But we know, given the youth, the growth, the potential, the opportunities, and return on investment for serving and working with the Latino community, and the historic disenfranchisement in the policy process, that it's going to take a long-term effort, investment, strategizing, some failures, and continued pushes and persistence to success to get there. And if you're not working with an entity that is really committed to long-term success and long-term effort to get there, you're probably not going to see the kind of long-term gains and real acceleration of Latino student success that you want to see. And for us, this is really the core to get started in assessing all of these. And I guess I didn't put it here, but I guess the fifth one I would add is that you need to work with organizations that are serious about partnering, and that means that they're willing to put some skin in the game and make organizational or institutional commitments, not just for long-term effort, but in the short run to figure out what's going to work for them. And all of those are critical for Excelencia when we think about where to work and with whom to work. Okay. Oops, that came a little bit fast. My apologies. Very quick slide here on what we did with the 5 sites that were identified by HIP. And I don't think Ann mentioned it, so maybe I should take a moment to share with you quickly. HIP identified 5 locations, and there were 2 states, 2 regions, and a city. And I will say, as somebody who does a lot of research and works with data, it's very challenging to take a look at 5 locations with different geographic bents to be helpful in kind of common understanding and a needs assessment of what HIP might need to know in order to determine where they were going to work. And HIP told us from the beginning of the 5 sites they had to select 2 in which to work. And so we really worked hard to make sure that we had core components that they could do a strong assessment, but also some relative comparisons of where it might make sense for them to work so they could decide where they were going to go. And in those areas, we had Colorado, North Carolina, South Florida, Philadelphia, and Miami. Oh, did I get the 5th one right? I'm sorry. Miami, that they were going to really work with and make sure that they had enough information to decide where they were going to go. And, that's in New Orleans. I'm sorry. So it's Philadelphia, New Orleans, South Florida, North Carolina, and Colorado. So all of them really great potential. Large, fast-growing Latino populations, but we focused on 4 components of need assessment that we thought if we had to narrow down the tons of data and information could be helpful to HIP. We thought these could really get them thinking about college readiness in constructive ways as they decided who they could partner with. So first, we always want to start with data. What's the current status of Latinos in the educational pipeline? And when you look at the need assessment we shared with them, the scan, we tried to give them information that was, ran the gamut of academic preparation, college readiness, attainment, population growth, those kinds of factors to get the current status for each of the 5 locations. And the second, we wanted to get a list of community-based organizations for partnership. And we know, as HIP is a national organization, as is Excelencia, that you have to work with those that are grounded and own the community effort. You can't come in as a national organization and just impose things down. And so identifying community-based organizations that have the confianza, the trust in the community, and finding whether they were ready to work and met those criteria of partnering was really important. And so we made sure we put together a list of those. We did some of our own work. We also work with others. I'll share with you the data to identify community-based organizations that could be partners in the effort to address the effort of Latinos to College. Third, we looked at foundations and funders. We all know that this work takes more than any one organization can do, more than probably all of us on this phone could do, and then some. And so identifying community-based organizations and foundations and funders that could collaborate, that had a similar vision or willing to invest and support for the long-term effort was also important for them to decide where they might be able to work. And then fourth, we wanted to look at the policy landscape. Working with individual students is what we know makes the most significant difference. But in many environments and contexts, we have to address policy. And policy is about scale. How do you get to a scale where you serve not just 10, 20 students, but 50, 1,000, 50,000 students? And wanted to see whether the policy landscape was right for working with the community-based organizations and funders in the space. So we try to put all of those components together in a neat assessment to help inform HIP's decision of where they could work. Here we go. So where the information came from, because there were 5 different locations, we really wanted to make sure we had consistency in the metrics that were used. We used all public data. For us at Excelencia, it's important that you're able to replicate, identify the data that was used if you want to find out on your own where it's done, and make sure that there's consistency across the board, because for public policy that's so important and required. So we took each of the components that I listed. Each of the 5 sites had information on population, educational attainment, academic achievement, college preparation, potential community-based organizations, foundations, and the policy context. And for the CBOs and foundations, we tried to narrow it down to about 5 or so organizations. Not that that was an exhaustive list by far, but in our subjective assessment, there was value in they were potentially ready, and it was up to HIP to follow up. So for population, we used the census and educational attainment, the census, academic achievement. We looked at state departments of education, and in some cases for the local areas, we tried to get school district information. Sometimes it was surprising to find that data were not disaggregated sufficiently by race and ethnicity and academic achievement to be able to tell a complete story. And if that's the case, sometimes we had to use state-level data, but to the extent we could, we tried to get the most up-to-date and geographically relevant data we could to help HIP out. In college prep, we looked at College Board and ACT and disaggregate whether there are constraints and limitations to that. We wanted to make sure that we were at least giving them information that many state policymakers and others also take a look at. For community-based organizations, we went in broad scope, but we looked at affiliates for NCLR and LULAC and the United Way, and for many reasons they're often connected already in education. They have affiliation at the national level and have leveraging capacity. And both HIP and Excelencia believe very strongly you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. And if there were good organizations already in place doing good work, those are the ones you want to partner with rather than having to start anew in your effort and strategy. Same with foundations and funders. HIP has had relationships in many of these spaces that they were looking at, but we tried to amplify that by looking at foundations and funders that worked at the Foundation Center or with United Way, or that Excelencia had been exposed to through some of our work across the country, that might be willing and interested in partnering with HIP in addressing issues of educational achievement for Latinos. And then the last one, And this is very much where Excelencia took some liberties, very responsible with our role, but trying to make sure that we understood the landscape, whether it was at the state policy level or in some cases the regional or school district level, to give the best assessment we could to HIP in understanding what the context was like, the educational space, and the readiness and the willingness for policy to support good community-based efforts and strategies. So a little bit about the policy context and recommendations that we gave to Hispanics in philanthropy. Looking at all this data, the need assessment, the readiness, the willingness to potentially partner, the interest in Latinos, all of those factored into the policy context and recommendations we made in the document and in many conversations with HIP staff. And I will say, I'll focus on a sampling of what we tried to do to help inform their decision making in going from 5 locations to 2. So I'll focus on 2, the 2 locations that were selected by HIP to do additional work. And in that way, maybe transition to the next part of this presentation. When we looked at all of these locations overall, we did combine the factors I shared with you, all the data, all the ideas of how do you pick where to go and with whom to work. And when we looked at Colorado, we saw here's a interesting, relatively maturing location, mature Latino representation, which means there are some communities in Colorado that have had Latino representation and leadership longstanding, and yet also a young and fast-growing population in other areas of the state. But overall, we saw significant educational preparation and attainment gaps when compared with non-Hispanic whites, which are the majority population there, and said, there's a significant enough equity gap here that there are opportunities for an organization like HIP with partners to make a significant difference. And that was important for us to see that population growth, the clarity, the maturity, but also the need of equity gap and ways to address it. We also saw there was an increased awareness of Latinos and their educational attainment in communities and across the state in ways that hadn't really been at the forefront. It had always been there, but forefront in the same manner that we had seen previously. We saw the policy leadership in Colorado to address Latinos as part of the educational construct. We saw that attention growing as well, and also in some of the specific districts where there's a high concentration of Latino students. And so we saw a really strong attention, willingness, and readiness to work in Colorado. And then the final part, looking at community-based organizations and foundations, we found that HIP already had significant partnerships in the state with CBOs and with foundations that they could leverage to focus on education. Many of the relationships had been in other components of HIP's work, but that there was a primed interest by foundations and CBOs to turn to education as part of the whole. So for us, one of the reasons we gave them our assessment about the potential of Colorado as a location to work in was based on those kinds of areas. And it's probably a little bit more in depth than that, but I think that's the core of the policy context we were looking at. And then in North Carolina, we had a much more emerging Latino population. Young, fast-growing, very diverse combination of Latinos who've been there for quite a while, and then more recent immigrants and undocumented dreamers and others that were there. And so it was a very different context. In some ways, the awareness and attention, the history of Latinos in North Carolina was much more constrained, evolving and growing. And there's some really strong efforts on the ground and leadership, but that it was a very different context. And in some ways, that could be very appealing for Hispanics in philanthropy to work in. When we did an assessment of the educational environment, we knew many Latinos would potentially be the first in the family to go to college because the educational attainment gaps were even larger in North Carolina than many other states and locations we'd looked at. And that therein lies a core educational issues to address. And then we also saw some real challenges in the state policy level addressing K-12 education, teacher tenure, school choice, the willingness or lack thereof to be supportive of more recent Latino immigrants and undocumented or dreamers in the educational pipeline. And it created a context that's very challenging, both challenging in their own ways, but that can be very compelling. And this is also a community in the state where Hispanics in Philanthropy has significant partnerships with CBOs and foundations, and core leadership has a representation in North Carolina that's really making impressive strides in their work to address Latinos, to bring the intentionality needed for support. So for those reasons, and I'm happy to answer questions, but we really try to focus on the locations and their strengths as opportunities for HIP to work. I think I can, and there you go. So, I changed it up. My apologies. So maybe with this, I'll turn it back to Ann, who can talk a little more about the HIP perspective in selecting North Carolina and Colorado and what they did to start the effort there.
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks for that overview. I think also, the report's really valuable because there's a lot more information, and I think that the Excelencia team did a really great job of teasing out information that is useful on a practical level, not just for the two states, state-level context that we ended up choosing for the project, but also for the two metro areas, which are South Florida and southeastern Pennsylvania, so the Metro Philadelphia region and the Metro Miami region, as well as New Orleans. So and I just want to mention also that my colleague Althea Gonzalez is on the line as well. She's our North Carolina programs manager, and she, as Deborah mentioned, the work in North Carolina is really impressive. The work that's been going on there, and I think that if there are any specific questions about the North Carolina context, she's really the person who has the expertise there. And so, if there end up being a lot of questions about North Carolina, then either if she's available for questions, then she can answer the questions directly, or if it seems like there's a lot more detail that is, because I see there's the question about South Carolina as well. There's a researcher on the line who wants to know, who's doing very similar work in South Carolina, and so I feel like this is also a really good space for people to make connections based on that type of work. So anyway, so Althea has also been working on the application in the research triangle of a Latino student success program that's funded by the Lumina Foundation, and so as Deborah mentioned, there's a lot of considerations that go into where this type of program makes the most sense. And in North Carolina, there was ongoing work in the education space. So Althea has been really, at the forefront of that. And then in Colorado, we basically had to start a program from scratch there with our next speaker, who is Carlos Martinez from the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado, and he'll speak a lot more directly to the ongoing work that we're doing there. So let me give him the controls now. And Carlos, are you?
Yeah, I am here.
Okay.
Can people hear me? Okay, great. Thank you, Ann, for giving us the overview of this type of model, and Deborah for giving us the whole research and recommendation piece, which now I'm going to talk a little bit more about practice. Again, my name is Carlos Martinez. I'm the Executive Director of the Latino Community Foundation, and our foundation was created 7 years ago to engage Latinos and others to be philanthropic investors and to develop strong, vibrant Latino communities in Colorado. Since then, we have given over $1.2 million in grants, capacity building to a lot of organizations, about 70 organizations throughout the state. And we've also have have done special initiatives as well. Right now we have several of them, one being this HIP to College / Summer Melt initiative. When HIP came to us about partnering with them and looking to see how it is that we can find pathways for Latino student success, and showed us the report that Excelencia had done. It was wonderful to be able to have that information, but then for us was like, well, what kind of project can we develop? Also knowing that there was limited funds, and we all know that when you're looking to address post-secondary education, things sometimes are more costly. And then the other piece was that this project was a short-term project. From the design phase to the end phase of project implementation was 2 years, so we knew that we couldn't really have time to gear up from scratch and figure out what we were going to do. I think the biggest piece for us was, how do we want to invest these monies in a very strategic way? So what we did is we did some homework and asked around, you know, what would be the best way for investing these limited dollars. And we thought that after talking with folks that we would address the summer melt phenomenon, which is students who graduate from high school are college bound, but somehow during that summer never make it to the first day of class in September. And so what we were seeing here that in Colorado, that there were a high percentage of Latinos throughout the state that were graduating, were college intending, but actually never made it to the first day. And so we felt that if we looked at that and looked at a way that how we can work with organizations to not create necessarily new programs within their organizations, but how can they realign their services that they have so that they can address this and be able to provide a nice transition from high school into college. Transition well from high school to college, also have a higher percentage of graduating from a 4-year or 2-year institution. So that was kind of like our piece there, that was going to be our focus. The second part then was, who do we want to partner with? Because like I said, you know, we didn't want to have to go ahead and recreate something, and we wanted to work with organizations that already had an infrastructure in place, that were already providing services to students and have the capability of realigning their services. So we did not do a general RFP. We actually vetted some organizations and then decided based upon our vetting process who those partners would be. And so we did kind of like an invitation-only RFP to organizations who were already serving Latino youth, who already had programs in place, who already were doing data collection and had access to data as well, so that they would be able to go ahead and provide some of that information without having to go and create new systems. At the end, what we did is we selected 2 school districts, and we did 2 school districts that are heavily Latino serving school districts, 2 community-based organizations, and then another organization that's more of a scholarship organization. And we wanted to have a mix of organizations, because if we were to later on take this to scale after this 2-year pilot phase, that we wanted to be able to learn from these various organizations how we can possibly implement this in other parts of the state that may not necessarily have all 3 of these organizations in place in their communities, but at least one of them. So we went with those organizations, and our goal for our first year is to serve almost 600 Latino students. And we're actually looking right now for funding for a second year of the implementation phase so that we can do a little bit more work. Project or the HIP funding only takes us through a design planning grant process and then an implementation grant process for 1 year. So we're hoping to be able to get a second year of implementation to have a little bit more data around there. As I was mentioning, the first 9 months were spent on looking at the design of how we were going to do this. Then we did give out planning grants to organizations for about 3 months to help them really rethink how it is that they can realign their current programs and services to create some transition bridge programs that would increase the number of Latinos matriculating in college. And right now, where we're at right now is they have done the planning piece of it. They have come together and presented their implementation proposals. And right now, we're looking at those implementation proposals, and we'll be funding those at the end of the month so that they can start in January. They will start implementing their projects, and we'll have some data by the end of the year. That takes us to the next slide, which is our data evaluation piece of it. Right now, HIP, along with LCFC ourselves, and the grantees, we will be designing an evaluation process that will be able to capture the data that is needed to evaluate the overall success of the project, to be able to capture some best practices in engaging Latino youth in their educational trajectory. Also, we'll be able to look at measuring summer youth engagement activities. A lot of our organizations will be using mentors, so we also want to measure the effectiveness of using mentors in a process like this. Also, their college readiness, their navigation skills of being able to know how to navigate a post-secondary system. And the big piece that all of our grantees are going to be incorporating is really great to see that, and really will be evaluating that piece as well. We're hoping that by the end, 60% of participating Latino youth will matriculate or be enrolled. In some of our communities, that transition is from high school to college is only about 25 to 30% in some parts of Colorado, so we're hoping to really increase that through this project. If we're able to do the 2 years, we'll probably serve about a little over 1,300 students, but in year 1 it'll be about 600. So based upon the model, based upon the research that Excelencia has done, that Deborah presented, we've been working on this project, this model, to see how it is that we can actually be able to create a smoother transition for Latino students. I think one of the things that our state has been able to do, it has been able to get students getting them ready to college, but that transition piece is one piece that has not been paid attention to, and is definitely a piece that is lacking here in Colorado. So we hope that through this project, we will be able to have more information, have more data on this, and to see how these models of 3 different type of sites can really contribute to this transition for Latino youth and put them on the pathway for academic success. And I think I'll end there so we can have some time for questions and answers. And give it back to Anne.
Thanks, Carlos. So then, just to sort of close out a little bit where we're at right now and moving forward through the next year, you know, based on this needs assessment and the policy environment, we chose North Carolina and Colorado to implement this first phase of HIP to College. And, you know, as Carlos mentioned, we're hoping that these 2 implementations in very different states will be able to show, you know, a wide-ranging, you know, sort of we'll be able to address in a lot of different ways through several different lenses, what sort of pathways to college programs are effective in different types of contexts. So moving forward, we'll be operating these different programs with 10 different grantees, 5 in each state, through 2015. And we are also planning on doing a crowdfunding campaign with our grantees, not specifically hip to college, but we're going to be doing an education-based crowdfunding campaign in late winter, early spring of 2015, and we hope that this is something that's attractive and interesting for the community-based organizations that we're working with, just in terms of fundraising and social media and those types of capacity building activities. And so I think that now is a good time to open it up to questions. I'm also going to unmute. I'm going to unmute Deborah as well, and I'm also going to unmute Althea, just in case there are more questions about North Carolina. So there we go. And I see there is one question already. If there are any concerns, thank you, Lydia. So the question is, were there any concerns over duplication of programs that currently exist and other state-funded early outreach programs? Yes. I think that, as Deborah mentioned in her section about the needs assessment, we were looking sort of strategically as where this initiative in its early stages, where Hip to College in its early stages would have the most effective reach. And, if there are effective programs in place, duplication is somewhat unnecessary. I think that, because of the close relationships we have at the state level, whether it's HIP staff that is based in a state or whether it's local partners or a combination of both, that gives us sort of a more comprehensive understanding about which programs already exist and where there's more of a need for these projects and programs and where they have the potential to be more effective.
If I could just add to that, Anne, I do think that, we have more need than we have efforts in place. And then when you consider how historically disenfranchised the Latino population has been, even in states like Colorado that have had a long history of Latinos, or North Carolina where there's a young growing population, we want to be as strategic as possible. But I do think that, working with the TRIO community, which is so important, and with early outreach and efforts that I know TRIO isn't even serving about 1/3 of the students who are eligible for TRIO and its abilities. So learning from what TRIO is doing is important, but also being able to spread and serve more students of those who've not been engaged is a critical part of what HIP is trying to do. So I think it's a great question, and part of it is if you do an effective need assessment, you see where students aren't being served or where they might be served, but in such small numbers you're not getting to the scale you need, and leveraging that is absolutely critical to the work I think all of us are trying to do, leveraging it so more of our young people are being served well.
Are there any other questions? We're waiting for some to come in the conversation box, in the text box.
And maybe we'll take an opportunity while you're waiting for the questions to share that, in looking at the information in the metro areas that HIP had originally identified, New Orleans, and then Southeast Philadelphia and South Florida, the locations that weren't ultimately selected at this time, given the limited resources. And I think we found a great opportunity there as well. Different contexts and realities. As many of you know, Miami tends to be a place where there has been a longer history of Latino participation and engagement, and yet there's still gaps in attainment, sometimes within Latino population. So not disaggregating data, so you don't just look at Latino in the aggregate, but subgroups and populations was important. New Orleans, very young, fast-growing, especially in blue-collar fields of families coming in and supporting and seeing opportunities, but also the economic constraints and challenges were there, was something that we all took a look at in talking to HIP. So I know they weren't selected, but hopefully you'll see in the report some of the potential for others interested in working in locations such as that.
The other thing I'd like to go ahead and share also is that a couple of weeks ago we had our grantees come together to be able to present their implementation proposals. And as we move forward in our work also, we're really looking to develop this cohort and really have it kind of like a learning group as we move forward. It's really great to see how they're learning from each other as well, just in the short amount of time that they've come together, how it is that they're connecting with each other, how they're learning from each other, how they're kind of like, oh, I'd like to add that component, never thought about that component to my program, want to go ahead and add that on here. And it's really nice to see how they're working in collaboration and being able to go ahead and take some of these activities that some of them may be doing in their programs and replicating them within their organization to be able to offer a much a bigger array of services to Latino students. And it's wonderful to be able to see that and work with them as a learning group so that they can learn from each other and share their learnings as well, and not just be a grantee relationship.
Althea, are you on the line? Because I know you've been doing a lot of work. We mentioned kind of North Carolina in passing. Your work, which is very locally based and as it's growing. Do you have some key takeaways that you might want to share with others in the group?
Sure, happy to. And this has been great to look at our work on both the macro level and a micro on the ground level. I think when considering working with our Latino students on educational issues, that geographic cultural context that Deborah referenced earlier is incredibly important. In our work in North Carolina, we're doing work in 2 metropolitan urban counties and 1 rural county. And the challenges, the context are totally different in each one. Someone mentioned TRIO and other programs like that. We found that even if those programs exist, they're underutilized by our Latino students and not well known among providers who work with Latino students. So we found that part of our work has been not just to work directly with students and families, but really bringing together the community resources and helping them align the work they're doing, to coordinate the work that they're doing so that the outreach to the Latino community is much more effective. We've also certainly found that the policy environment that Deborah mentioned earlier is critical in determining access and success for our students. So while we would love the luxury of just working directly with students and families, we understand that there are institutional barriers that make it difficult for our students to succeed, where colleges don't know how to help first-generation students or don't know how to bring in supportive Latino family members to help students, or certainly at the legislative level where we have policies that make it difficult. I'm so jealous of Carlos in Colorado that they have a policy context that allows in-state tuition for undocumented students. That makes a tremendous world of difference, though it's not the only difference, obviously. But we operate in a very different context in North Carolina, and so it's important when doing this educational work to think about the whole pipeline and all the stakeholders in that pipeline. It's not just about students and families, but there are a lot of people and a lot of systems that are affecting our student success. Back to you, Deborah.
This is Anne. We just got another question. So what are some, and actually, Althea, this dovetails nicely with what you're saying. What are some ways that you're assuring sustainability of this pipeline? The main concern is the discrepancy between outreach and a lack of college-going culture at the institutions that they're serving. You know, I think that there's a lot of different approaches, and Althea mentioned some of them, understanding sort of the institutional barriers, working towards advocacy. You know, what we're looking at in a lot of cases, especially with first-generation college-going populations, is the importance of including families, and Carlos mentioned that in his presentation as well, and I know that that's a big part of the work in North Carolina, that, you know, it's a group effort, it's a family-based effort, and that's something I think that resonates with Latinos very, very strongly, to include the families in the planning process. And in most cases, yeah?
If I may jump in when you're done, I have a point on this.
Yes. And I was just going to add that, you know, most of the students who we're working with, you know, they're staying pretty close to home. They're staying, you know, at a county level, maybe a few hours away, but nobody's really going very far. And so it's even more important to include families when you consider the strong pull that the students have, particularly first generation, to being close to home, being accessible. And Althea?
Yes, definitely echoing the points you said. One of the things that we've been doing around sustainability in the pipeline is having colleges bring together their various departments, which doesn't happen very often, and having them sit down and talk to each other about what they are or not doing for Latino student success. So with several colleges, we've had the admissions department and financial aid and student services and dean of the faculty, and all these different folks come together in one room. And every time we've had this happen, they start to share what they are doing around Latino student success. And the other departments say, I had no idea you were doing that. I had no idea you were doing that. So there is such an internal disconnect in a lot of big institutions that they haven't even coordinated the services. And so what we found that is great for sustainability is that conversation has led to intentional strategic decisions at these institutions about how to move forward in serving Latino students. And that has led to more hiring of Latino faculty, creating Latino liaison positions for incoming freshmen and their families, as well as for transfer students into universities. So I think sustainability at the institutional level can be certainly created if we help them to actually talk to each other and look at their own data and make good strategic decisions.
And I think for us, one of the things that we're doing with the organizations that we're funding for long-term sustainability is that when we look at the internal infrastructures of these organizations, it's about cultural and systems change internally. So we're helping to fund them also to like change their culture and change the way they're currently providing services to create more of the seamless pipeline. So and you know, for all of our organizations also, that they have a very strong mission about student success as well. So what we're helping them do is rethink how they're providing their services and realigning them. And then on the external piece of it also for sustainability, kind of like what was mentioned a few minutes ago also, is that whole coordination of other services that currently exist out there externally, and how do you bring them in and have them be part of your internal systems so that you're not having to go out there and reinvent things or figure it out. But there's a lot of folks that are doing things already that we don't all know what they're doing. And so it's this whole coordination of services on the external piece and on the internal side, that cultural and systems change internally that will contribute to the long-term sustainability of these projects.
Thank you. I think that we're just at the hour, so once again, I want to thank everybody for taking an hour out of your day, for participating. This will be posted on YouTube, and when it's posted, I'll be sending out the link for that, as well as the link to the report. And please, feel free to share and circulate with friends and colleagues. And in particular, I want to thank Althea, Carlos, and Deborah. As you can tell, this work is complicated and it requires a lot of coordination and collaboration between people at lots of different types of organizations. And so we're really excited for 2015. We're really excited to see where this project goes in both North Carolina and in Colorado. And we're very hopeful and we're very excited. So thank you all very much. And I'll be in touch in a few days.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.